Demon's Souls, the PS5 remake, is an absolutely killer launch title. But that almost doesn't do the game justice because, it's a good launch title, that almost has a negative connotation to it because launch titles generally a lot of the time are very just okay or mediocre games. But no, Demon's Souls, the remake, is a great game in and of itself, launch title or not. And it should be noted as an example of how to do a launch game right. To have an excellent launch game, and not only does PS5 have Demon's Souls, it has Spider-Man Miles Morales, an excellent game, but that aside, it should be an example of what to do when you are launching a brand new console, to have a solid game, to give people an incentive to actually buy one so they can actually play some brand new games right away. But unlike Spider-Man, Demon's Souls, get ready to die and die again. Demon's Souls for the PlayStation 5 is an excellent game to help showcase what the PlayStation 5 is capable of. From the haptic feedback to the load times to the incredible graphics. Seeing Demon's Souls remade so well and so faithfully for the PlayStation 5 is incredible. Demon's Souls was full of incredible vistas to behold. It was also full of terrifying dungeons with, untold horrors lurking within. And for both of these, I would often just stop and soak up everything the environments had to offer because it just added, an extra level of immersion. And the environments in this game were integral to this game being able to tell its story. I can say without a doubt, at the moment, this is the most hauntingly beautiful game I have ever played. Enemy monsters and bosses were beautifully done in the remake, and the bosses in this game were terrifying to behold in all of their intimidating splendor. But aside from enemy characters and bosses, I absolutely loved how cool you can make your own character look in this game as well. I just happen to go with a heavy melee build. So, I have, heavy weapons and heavy armor on. And I just loved how some of the different armor sets looked in this game. And in the character creator, I just happened to give my character, glowing red eyes. I felt it very much fit with the theme and the mood of this game. And lo and behold, I can see his eyes glowing behind the slit in his helmet. And it was just so cool to see and such a great touch. The graphics in this game are just, honest to God, awesome. For the most part, if I did have a problem with this game's graphics, like if I, actually really sat down and really thought hard, actually, doing that right now, if I did come up with something, it would just be nitpicking. The graphics for this game are astounding. And honestly, as soon as the game started, I was pretty impressed. Even in the character creator, you can pick your own walking animation, which is something, I can't remember ever doing in a character creator. Maybe it is out there and it has been done before, but I was just like, I can even, pick how my character walks. Like, that's pretty cool. Speaking of walking, when you're traversing throughout this game, you are able to, step on corpses and disturb them, and they kind of move around once you walk over top of them. And even just walking on different sets of debris, you'll hear different sounds, and it just all adds to the sense of immersion in the game. The sound design was very well done. And speaking of immersion, the haptic feedback, I thought it was good in Spider-Man, but for Demon's Souls, holy crap. Every swing of the sword or block with the shield, the haptic feedback is reacting to in the controller, and it's super hard to describe. You almost need to experience it to know what I'm talking about, but it just all added to that sense of immersion for the game, and it just made it an awesome experience. It's something you will notice as soon as you pick up the controller and start playing Demon's Souls. The haptic feedback combined with character animations and the great graphics almost gave the game, like a heavy feeling to it, in a good way. It was heavy in the way that you felt like you were this character. Since I was a heavy melee build, I felt like I was burdened with this heavy armor, and I could almost feel the weight of my shield when I would block or when I would swing my, my huge ass sword around. It was truly a next-gen experience. And this next point I'm gonna make might be redundant for future PlayStation 5 game reviews, and that is the load times. The load times are, once again, just like Miles Morales was, they're instantaneous and you barely notice them. You're jumping from area to area super quick, all of a sudden there's like a little bit of fog that pops up and all of a sudden you're in the area. So going forward, unless there are detrimental load times, it's like where I'm noticing load times again, I might not even mention it. Because, if all PlayStation 5 games are going to be like this, load times are going to be a thing of the past and they're not even going to be worth mentioning. So just so you know, there's no load times. So after you get past, the character creator and, how great the game looks and, getting used to the haptic feedback and all that stuff, how does the game actually play itself? So Demon's Souls, holds your hand for a little bit at the beginning, kind of gets you through the first level, and then it opens up completely. You can go to whichever world you want and tackle whichever boss in what order. And also, it doesn't really hold your hand in terms of, which play style you need to choose. That is very much left up to you. And in terms of figuring out how to defeat bosses and the strategies you need to use, once again, that's up to your problem solving skills, and it's totally dependent on the player. And the great thing about this game is there's, a variety of play styles to pick from. There's no right or wrong one. Some will be better against certain bosses than others, but that's, part of the fun of the game, figuring out what works against what bosses. And when you are able to use your problem solving skills appropriately and to defeat these bosses, it is so rewarding. Can be incredibly frustrating to get there. Don't get me wrong. I was frustrated more than once in this game, but it's so rewarding to conquer these bosses or just, a tough part of a certain level. I think I died more often just to the regular enemies within levels than the bosses themselves. And I gotta say, there is nothing wrong. If you are stuck and you are beating your head against the wall and you're getting to the point where you're not enjoying the game anymore, just stop and maybe look up a strategy or look up a boss's weakness. I fully encourage you to do that because there's no point in you being so stubborn about looking up a solution to a problem that you don't enjoy the game anymore. And we all hit walls sometimes in games. I fully encourage you to do that because this game is so good and so fun. If you hit a wall, just, look for some help to get over it. It is the advice I would have. And as I've said, there are a lot of different ways to approach combat in this game. But what I haven't said is that combat in and of itself is just honestly really fun, especially when you are fighting the game's bosses. This game's bosses, like, all the other Souls games and so on and so forth, they're the highlight of the game when it comes to combat. They really are. If this is your first Souls experience, or if it's gonna be, it was mine too. I played the original Demon's Souls. It was my first From Software game, and encountering the bosses for the first time, it even happened again playing the remake. You would come to these boss fights and they would be so intimidating and so vast in size sometimes. I would just sit there with a controller in my hands being like, how am I supposed to be able to defeat something like this? This game does an excellent job of making you feel this big. Makes you tiny, it makes you feel tiny and insignificant next to these massive bosses, but you're gonna go and try and beat them anyway. You feel like you're marching towards your own death, which generally you are. You're probably gonna die to most of these bosses at least once. But that's the game doing its job beautifully. It like triumph over, overwhelming odds or adversity. That is just this game doing its job well when you feel that way. And then when you come out on top after feeling super tiny and insignificant, there's nothing like it. And that's why the Souls games have got, nowadays such a devoted fan base because they do an amazing job. So once you've conquered this game and defeated all the bosses, what's left? Well, New Game Plus. And like a lot of other New Game Pluses out there, you carry over with your stats, all of your equipment, and bosses and enemies scale upwards to give you more of a challenge again. So, sounds good, right? But there's also something else. If you want to flip the difficulty on its head, Literally, there's fractured mode, which essentially mirrors the entire game. So everything is obviously opposite of what it was before, your character included. So this is for those players who know the game like the back of their hand and have done New Game Plus a few times. It offers a brand new challenge for players because it's incredibly disorienting, I would assume. I haven't gone through it fully, but obviously that is what it's meant to do. And it's there to provide you with more of a challenge and more bang for your buck. So, another win for them in terms of, giving you more gameplay to enjoy. In terms of this game's difficulty, while there is only one setting and that's hard, there is something that will affect the challenge, the levels do possess, and that is tendency, or world tendency to be specific. So there's two types. There's white tendency and black tendency. The closer you get to white tendency, the more easier the levels will be. The closer you get to black tendency, the more difficult they will be. Like, you'll get really hard enemies showing up in these levels that have a lot more HP and just attack power in general. And generally, the way you affect world tendency, and they don't make this super clear in the game, but your white tendency is affected by essentially good actions. The more good actions you have, such as, not killing NPCs and killing bosses, your white tendency will go up. And your black tendency will go up if you kill, for example, NPC characters or non-combatants. So if you want a higher level of difficulty, be an asshole. If you don't, be a nice guy. And one last little quality of life improvement I want to mention, because it was something that was really quite annoying in the original, is you can get overburdened in this game. You're only allowed to carry a certain amount of things before you're essentially overweight. You can send items immediately to your storage unit now in this game. As soon as you go to pick something up, and it says you're overburdened, it gives you an option to send it right to storage. And it's such a nice touch because it just, it prevents all that tedious backtracking and having to be super careful of what you're carrying all the time. I understand that was supposed to add, some strategy to the game, to be wary of what you're carrying. But honestly, for me, a lot of the time, being weighted down because I'm carrying too much stuff, I find it more of an annoyance than anything. So good on them for fixing that problem. And while I know the story for the Demon's Souls remake is exactly the same as the original game, I can't help but feel like it was better in this game. And I think I know why, at least it was for me. Demon's Souls relies on its atmosphere, its environments, its mood to tell its story. And with upgraded and well-crafted visuals, Demon's Souls was able to tell its story in a more efficient way. And naturally, because everything is, upgraded visually, I was able to notice things about my environment that I didn't really before. This game has awakened me to a degree. It's made me appreciate atmospheric storytelling to a degree I didn't know I could. It's very much made me a fan of, dark, moody, atmospheric games. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. But that's not to say that there isn't a story and there isn't good lore in the game, because there is. It's just that you need to hunt the story down and piece things together on your own a little bit more in this game, which can be fun and entertaining in its own right. And Demon's Souls does it very well. It makes it incredibly rewarding when you are able to piece things together in terms of the game's overall story and its backstory regarding, the connection between characters. But overall, it's the mood and the game's settings and environments that really tell its story. And in terms of this game's orchestral scores, it does a good job. There was nothing that made me stop in my tracks and be like, oh my God, I need to listen to this piece of music and just sit here for a minute. There was just nothing like that in this game for me. Not to say that the game does a bad job with its soundtrack. The game's soundtrack suits the game very well. And the soundtrack also does a great job when you're in some of these absolutely harrowing boss fights as well. It picks up the pace and it lets you know you're in for an epic encounter. So it does its job. It was just, once again, just nothing that really kind of like grabbed my attention super well. In terms of sound, what I was more impressed with, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit already, was the sound design. I was much more impressed with the sound design versus the soundtrack. Whether it was, swinging, you're too big of a longsword or claymore in a tight hallway and it bouncing off the wall and hearing that unique clang, knowing like, oh man, I shouldn't have been swinging that way in this tight hallway, or just crossbow bolts or arrows zipping past your head and hearing them zip past you. The sound design for this game was excellently done. So all in all, Demon's Souls is just, a great example of how to do a proper remake for a cult classic. And, I could have used more content in this game because there was some cut content from the original release, and I would have loved to have seen that cut content in this game, but, I understand why it wasn't. I still wish they did, because I very much wanted to go to that broken Arkstone that had the Giants Kingdom and to see, what that was all about. But hey, all in all, still an excellently done remake. And, it just makes me incredibly excited for Blue Point Games' next game. And while I know that they want to make their own original IP, and they totally deserve to, I just love seeing them remake, the classic games of yesteryear so well. And it makes me excited for any remake project they decide to take on next. And given how unsuccessful the original Demon's Souls was at launch, like it took a lot of steam for that game to pick up a following. It makes me incredibly hopeful that From Software will make a direct sequel to Demon's Souls someday. Because obviously we have the Dark Souls series, which is the spiritual successor, but I would love a direct sequel to Demon's Souls proper, because it has a place near and dear to my heart. And if they ever do that, I will be taking my place in line along with everyone else, just waiting to be punished by that game. So no, Demon's Souls, not only an excellent launch title, but an excellent game in and of itself. And you haven't tried a Demon's Souls or a Dark Souls or any of those types of games, and you're worried about being overly frustrated by dying so much, just know that that challenge is there. And hey, don't be afraid to look up a solution or two if you really need it to. All right, it'll just make you enjoy the game more if you can actually play it and you know what to do. Anyway, thanks for joining me for this Game Break review, guys. I'll see you next time.